Architecture Codex. If you want to see more, like, comment, share, and most importantly, subscribe.
When it was first built, Parisians hated it. But over time, they learned to embrace this new kind of architecture and this new method of construction. You might be thinking I'm talking about the Eiffel Tower, but actually, I'm talking about the Pompidou Center. For many people, the hint that something new in architecture was coming after modernism was this museum, library, and performing arts complex built in 1977 by architects Renzo, Richard Rogers, Peter Rice, Mike Davies, and probably a few others. I think the Pompidou Center is more seminal in history than other earlier postmodern buildings because its impact was worldwide, whereas the work that Robert Venturi was doing while preceding it had impact only in the world of architecture and design. Looking at the building, you can see all the parts, as if the building was turned inside out. There is a transparency that is both illuminating and confusing. You see structure, you see air ducts, you see electrical conduits, all highlighted and distinguished through form and color. Even the grand interior staircase of past eras is stretched alongside of the building as if one would ascend 3 or 4 stories before you actually enter the building. Exiting could be just as confusing. The number of named architects hints how intensely each building feature would be designed, as if each artifact was saying, look at me, even though I am a fresh air intake duct, I am special. It's as if each part of the building got its own participation trophy. What could be more postmodern than that? At the time, it was called high tech, but eventually became known as deconstructivism. Architectural design that pulled the parts of a building away from each other rather than containing them in a singular composed Greco-Roman or modern glass box. For many, it is sufficient to say that since it came after modern, it must be postmodern. As a term, postmodern in architecture is evolving. It can be an indication of more visceral or illogical forms or more historical reference creeping their way into the design, such as the work by Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown. Postmodern buildings did not have to be the austere Bauhaus modern with their point line plane geometry and non-materiality. Buildings did not have to be a pure idea compromised by the mundane reality of real-world construction and function. So postmodern in architecture is a broad term applicable to many styles. But overall, you might say its goal included bringing back organic form and human craft to architecture, where Bauhaus modernism was looking for a machined aesthetic. And so maybe the Pompidou Center is not postmodern, but hypermodern. Architectural design theory trails societal philosophy, so it might be worth looking at these terms outside of the world of architecture. Postmodernism is certainly a reaction to modernism, a philosophical, political, art, and architecture movement that said the human mind and rational thought defined truth. But it is really a harsh form of relativism, as it allows society or the state to define what is true. The 20th century had seen the rise of modernist states based on Marxist theory, the socialist states of the Soviet Union, National Socialist Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, Communist China, North Korea, and Castro's Cuba, and in its wake saw the destruction of about 100 million people. It is a political philosophy that seeks scientific control over everything, even human will. To this end, they will eliminate people and history to construct their own vision of utopia. Seeing it in real time was the basis for George Orwell's futuristic novel 1984. Rational thought, the focus of modernism, is an important aspect of human development, but it tends to ignore that men and women have hearts and souls. In fact, many modernists say that those intangible aspects of humanity are merely physical manifestations of brain, body, and conditioning. If this is true, then there is nothing that can actually be called love. A modernist might say that what appears to be love is really an organism's instinct to cooperate so that it can preserve itself and to reproduce. This is demonstrated by how many modernists do not believe in God or free will. I think it's kind of funny that people who do not believe in free will walk around smugly superior to everyone else. I mean, if you admit that you have no free will, then you cannot have intellect. You have no choice. There was no volition behind pursuing the ideas that you pursued. You are merely reacting chemically. But I digress. In their most evil form, modern and postmodern thinking are not very different. Neither believes in an absolute truth, and that all context and meaning is merely the construct of humans. And that would be the humans who have both military and political power. We see then three struggling movements in the latter part of the 20th century. Traditionalists who believe in an absolute truth. Rationalists who believe that all truth is a construct of the human mind. And those who believe that context is formed by your feelings, epitomized by the slogan, "If it feels good, do it." In common parlance today, the term postmodernism is also changing. It has taken on the pejorative connotation of being devoid of facts, where feelings override hard, undeniable realities. This relativism is more in line with the philosophies of existentialist thinkers such as Nietzsche or Sartre, who I find are more guided by their anger and their fears rather than by rational thought. But their existentialism, their belief that they can define the world through their own existence, is why you hear people say silly things such as, "my truth." Truth cannot be subjective. At its core, then, postmodern is separate from reality and rational thought. Perhaps the premier postmodernist thinker was Jean Baudrillard, who discussed the idea of the hyperreal in his 1981 treatise, Simulacra and Simulation. He writes that we are going about replacing reality with symbols, and this will mean that truth is lost as all information has become malleable. We see this in the media and in the news. I cannot attribute the quote, but it has been said that news used to tell you what happened and you had to decide what to think about it. But now the news tells you what to think and you have to decide what actually happened. In architecture, it allows us to build with a Disney World pretense in places other than a theme park. In other arts, postmodern was a turn away from the austere. In literature, we saw the hyperreal in a style called magical realism in books like 100 Years of Solitude and Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. In art, we saw the postmodern rise of realistic-looking paintings, verisimilitude, a reaction against the abstract modernist art which had eschewed craft, probably as a way for the talentless to proclaim themselves artists. Human craftsmanship was getting new respect. The musical phenomena called postmodern jukebox takes popular music and recasts it with much greater musicianship and better singing voices. Yet while many people are seeking more real experiences, postmodern thinking allows others to retreat into virtual ones. I think cosplay is a sign of people who like to mix dreams with reality, symbols supplanting real nature. Why can't I dress up in spandex bodysuits and pretend I am a superhero? Even now, people are talking about creating a virtual meta world for greater interaction, primarily because it seems they feel they lack control over the real world, where walking around and interacting is relatively easy and low-tech. Back to the building. Baudrillard actually references the Pompidou Center in his 1981 book, stating that it is, quote, a monument of cultural deterrence which functions as an incinerator of all cultural energy and devouring it. Gee, I just thought that the Pompidou Center looked really, really cool. By default, the Pompidou Center is postmodern because it came after modernism. But is it really philosophically postmodern? Is it a cultural incinerator? And was that an overt message imbued purposely by the architects, or just a consequence of the wave of thought it was riding? The building exposes and celebrates its parts. Is that hyper-real, truth pushing itself to the perimeter? Or is it cosplay, a building pretending it is a machine? By the way, I can't imagine any of this coming up during the design meetings. So, what do you think of the facade elements?
I hate it! I think your facade elements are nothing more than hyper-real cultural deterrents incinerating all creative energies!
Okay, how about if I move this air duct to the left 1 meter?
That is much better. I like it now.
The original and more practical controversy of the Pompidou Center had to do with the urban context. It is radically different in style and scale than most of the other buildings in the district, whose history goes back to the Middle Ages, while most of the buildings reflect a traditional 18th or 19th century building style. But I think it works because the contrast is significant and they have not copied the deconstructivist style in the neighborhood, making that region of Paris a giant mechanical chase of pipes and conduits. What helps is the Place Beaubourg, the large space about the size of the footprint of the Pompidou Center along its long entry edge. This makes the building part of a place, giving people walking in the neighborhood a chance to breathe before encountering the imposing Pompidou Center. There is another postmodern building nearby, but it is sunk into the ground rather than rising above the rooftops, so its impact was different. Forum les Halles by Claude Vasconi and Georges Pontriche used exposed white steel arches and glass to create a glowing void that is both a shopping center and a metro stop. Through the Pompidou Center, we saw Paris once again leading the world in experimental thought, affirming its claim to be the cultural and intellectual center of the world. Paris embraces all forms of architecture intellect, modern, postmodern, and historical, without ever losing its romantic charm. Paris has heart, which remains its allure. Hardcore modernists and postmodernists came to Paris to enjoy the sentimental streetscape, the passion for food and wine, and the ardent pondering of the great questions about life and love. They were romancing their intellectualism. Love is an important part of being a human being, and Paris can rightly claim that there is a lot of love in its architecture. Still, I curiously wonder what the results would have been if Jean-Paul Sartre's play No Exit had been set inside of the Pompidou Center. I'm Michael Molinelli, and this is Architecture Codex.